My last video didn't work, so I'm going to try this again. It was also longer, so I'm going to try another one. Last time we talked about problems with the Genesis narrative, and well, more specifically with the creation narrative and inconsistencies and other stuff. We're going to talk more about some problems in the narrative today, too, and we're going to talk about the problems with Noah. Now, interestingly, we're not going to talk about the problems with the flood narrative, or because the flood's actually it's it's amazing how many flood narratives there are throughout the world. Most cultures have flood narratives, not all cultures do, but most do. Floods are, of course, a pretty common thing in American history too. In world history, floods happen. They happen in coastal areas because of storm surges and tsunamis. They happen in, I mean, you have to remember that, the defining thing about where humanity settled for the first almost all of existence was near rivers, and rivers or near the sea, and normally near the sea at the mouth of a river. They needed access to fresh water, they needed water for crops, etc. So we've always lived in a place where floods could happen. And the one thing that I really want to touch on in terms of the flood narrative is what saves people. In the Greek flood narrative, in one of the Greek flood narratives, I should have looked up their names. Sorry, they're saved by their house lands uh, after the flood is over on the mountain, and it's transformed. Oh, sorry, that's my hand there, and is transformed into a temple. In the Gilgamesh epic, he is saved in a boat that has the dimensions and ratios of a ziggurat, which is, of course, a pre-Babylonian Sumerian temple. In other myths, people are either saved in a temple or saved by in another vessel, which is turned into a temple by the gods afterwards. And the Noah story isn't really that different because the dimensions of the ark, that weird 300 cubits by 75 cubits, or whatever it is, also has a good correlation in the dimensions of the courts of the Hebrew temple. Fun fact. I used to have an article on that. I'll look for it, maybe throw it in the comments if I find it. So, there's that. No, the thing that's weird is Noah's kids. He had three kids, of course, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. I'm sure there might have been others. There might have been daughters. We don't know because until a little later, women are recorded. But when women do get recorded, it's going to be cool. We're getting to that. So Noah has Shem. Shem has Arphaxad has Selah. Selah has Eber has Peleg. Peleg has Ru. Ru has Nahor, Terah. I'm skipping one. Abram. Right? Right. Uh, there's kids. There's a lot of them. And Noah lives for 950 years, which is, of course, less than Methuselah, but not really by much. When you're living for over 900 years, how much does 19 years really matter, right? Shem lives for 600. Everybody else lives for lessening amounts. And this is where it gets weird. Even though the numbers are directly given in the Genesis narrative, Genesis 11, 12, 13, 14, or no, yeah, Genesis 11, 12. Every timeline I find online for when their birth dates and death dates are don't line up, and I don't know how this is when they're kind of clearly given. And I did do all the math on them myself, and I wrote it down, and I don't remember where I put it, so you're welcome. One or the other. Shem's when Noah dies according to the narrative, 350 years after the flood. Abraham is born by then. Abraham's born around 292 years after the flood, if my reckoning is correct. I should put in a note right here that in the old lectures on faith, what used to be the doctrine part of the Doctrine and Covenants, there's a whole like catechistic recitation of when they were all born and when they all died. But I'm too tired now to go into that. Where was I? So Abraham is born and is alive for almost 60 years before Noah dies. Shem, Noah's son, outlives Abraham. That's kind of important. Shem outlives Abraham. Eber may or may not outlives Abraham as well. The other ones don't, but Shem and Eber do. Um, Shem actually, and this would really suck. This is what my notes came when I wrote it down. My notes say Abraham was born at most 292 years post-deluge. This means that Shem and Arphaxad and Selah and Abraham and Peleg the younger and Serug were all Serug, that's the one I forgot earlier, were all still alive, and Shem would outlive them all. That would suck. And it would. But there's other things that are neat about Shem. So in Genesis 14, Abraham goes to rescue Lot and the other people of the plain after they are captured as prisoners of war in a war, and he rescues the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah as well, and they try to give him stuff, and he says, no, because you're schmucks, and I don't want your stuff. I don't want you to ever be able to say that you had any part of me becoming who I am, because you're schmucks. Go, Abraham. So then, after all of this, and after the booty and plunder and spoils are all taken care of, Abraham has an interlude with a guy named Melchizedek. Now, Melchizedek is a common name in Mormondom because it is, of course, the term for one of the two priesthoods named after Melchizedek because he is such a great high priest. But the thing about the name Melchizedek is, it might not be a name. It is a title. Whether it's a titular name or a nickname, we don't know for sure. But there are some thoughts. For instance, in the Doctrine and Covenants, well, Hebrews, the Epistle to the Hebrews, talks a lot about, what's his face? Talks a lot about Melchizedek, of course, and Doctrine and Covenants talks a fair amount about Melchizedek and talks about him in section 84, of course, the Oath of the Covenant of the Priesthood. It talks about him in section 107 as well, and this is where things get interesting. It talks about him in Doctrine and Covenants 130, no, sorry. Yes. It doesn't talk about him in section 138, and it doesn't talk about him anywhere else. And this is where we get into cool things between early Mormonism and pre-rabbinical Judaism. The connections with the Talmud. According to the Talmud, Melchizedek is the name, the kind of the regnal name, it means Prince of Peace, for Shem. And this makes sense with the Abraham narrative. Would be why Abraham goes to Melchizedek to learn more about the priesthood and to pay tithes, because Shem is the patriarch, capital P. He's such the patriarch that he's going to outlive Abraham. He's going to live through half of Isaac's life too. So the early pre-rabbinical Talmudic Mishnah, the Rambam, all of those guys believed that Shem and Melchizedek were the same person. John Taylor taught that Shem and Melchizedek were the same person. And interestingly, in section 138, when they're doing the recitation of all the holy men, we have Noah and we have Shem referred to as the great high priest. We also see, of course, another place Melchizedek referred to as the great high priest. So, is this proof? No. Does it matter? Maybe not. But it's cool. And I like that. It makes sense. Because a lot of stuff in the Genesis story doesn't make sense. There's tons of characters. There's populations that rebound way too much. There's a lot of other stuff. But finding out just one thing and getting into it and be like, maybe this is the case. It helps me to realize that there might be some of those little hidden mysteries that we can dig out. And that as we put the effort and the time into discovering stuff, we can learn more. And so that is my thing today, is that Shem is probably Melchizedek. It might not be, but probably. We don't know for sure. We probably won't know for sure until a while, but it just makes sense. And we'll talk about some other things that make sense. We'll talk about when women appear in the narrative, which is going to be right after this period into the Abraham story. It's really cool. And that is it. So, I love you. Have a good day. Bye.